Thank you. Hello, everybody. I hope that you are all well today. I was about to say good morning, but I recognize that it is not morning for so many of you. So good afternoon on this January Monday, and good morning indeed if it is your morning. I am so excited to talk with you all today because it means that LILAC is getting so close. If you haven't been to LILAC before and this is your first time to attend LILAC, you are in for a treat on so many levels, because I think that LILAC is one of the best conferences on the planet. And also, it's in Dublin this year. It doesn't get much better than that. Dublin in March is going to be so much fun. I am really excited to talk with you this morning to try and tell you what worked for me when I'm trying to deliver an effective conference presentation. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the way that I approach when I'm delivering a session, be it at LILAC or be it anywhere else. And I've presented at LILAC a number of times now. So I'll try and bring in some of that sort of knowledge that I have, if I do indeed have much knowledge about LILAC particularly, and what might work well there. So with that in mind, I encourage you to use the chat box, as Catherine was saying. I encourage you to use Twitter or whatever ways that we can keep this conversation going. My Twitter handle is @Carbery. I have also started off a particular hashtag that might be fun to sort of use as we're going through today's session. So I encourage you to tweet using LILAC Prez, and then a copy of the slides that I'm going to use today, the slide decks, are already available on my SlideShare. The URL is right there, and I've already tweeted it as well. So don't feel like you have to go scrambling with notes right throughout. If you want to sit back and sort of take it all in and then follow through later on, there are some links and URLs towards the end as well that you might want to check up on a little bit later on. But do feel free to use the chat box, to use Twitter, and let's get this conversation going as best we can. All right. Well, I want to actually start to use the chat box right away, and I invite you to just say hi, tell us who you are, tell us where you're joining from. So are you in the morning time, or are you back over in the UK or Ireland or somewhere else where it's a little bit more afternoon for you? And tell us sort of your experience with LILAC. Is this your first time presenting? Have you presented before? And shout out if this is your first time attending LILAC. I think that will be fun to hear. So yeah, just use the chat box and say hi and jump in. Hi, Lucy. First time attending and presenting. Yeah, you are in for an absolute treat. It is one of my favorite conferences. Nice. Julia in cloudy Sheffield, not only your first time attending LILAC, but your first time ever presenting at a conference. And yeah, you're really excited. That is so cool. What a standard to set yourself. You're going to talk at LILAC for the very first time, not only at LILAC, but for your first presentation. That is amazing. Great. Ginny, hi. Yeah, it's going to be great in Dublin. I'm really excited. What else? Lindsay from Canada, where it's morning too. I bet you're equally as cold as we are in Vermont. First time presenting and attending. Awesome. Carrie, hi. You're in Michigan. I'm not sure I knew that. Have you switched location? Yes, we were in LILAC and Sheffield together. You could probably give me hints, Carrie. So do feel free to jump in. Hi, Lucy. First time at LILAC. Nice. You got a lot of first-time LILACers. And first time in Ireland as well. That's very cool. Hi, Charlotte in Manchester. You're presenting twice. Wow. Double the trouble. Rupert in Sheffield. Yeah, so LILAC was in your sort of vicinity recently, but your first time presenting. Super. Sarah Ann from DIT, hi, you're a LILAC newbie. I'm excited that it's going to be in our hometown of Dublin. It's going to be so much fun. Juanita's neither going to be presenting nor attending LILAC. Oh, that's a shame. Anyone else jumping in to say hi? Great. Well, do feel free to continue to use that chat box. Hi, David. First-time presenter and attendee. Oh, you're having trouble with the webinar, the audio. It might be a good idea to check with everyone else right now. Is the audio since I took over doing okay? Anything that I can do to sort of help improve that? Rupert, loud and clear. Thank you. Hi, Mike. Sarah's having audio problems too. Other folks seem to be okay. So Juanita is sort of lurking in the background to help anyone with audio issues. And there is, I believe, a dial-in number earlier on in the chat box that you might want to dial into. Thanks, Jenny, for sharing that number. Okay. Why don't we keep going? I encourage you to use the chat box to sort of call out any of those problems. And I also encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions as we're going along. Please don't feel that you have to hold off those questions until the end. I'm going to be pausing at various stages throughout our time this morning to make sure that we have more than enough opportunity to engage in conversation and to ask those questions. So yeah, I encourage you to make good use of that chat box. That's why it's there. All right, let's get going. So I'm really fascinated by the legacy that Steve Jobs has left on not only on Apple, but on the whole industry throughout his time. If you remember back to sort of the heydays of Apple in 2006, 2007, whenever he delivered one of his keynote speeches that would unveil the latest product, whether it was the iPhone or a new Mac or whatever it might be, it was really fascinating to watch how grown men and women would literally fall at their feet and hang on every single word that he had to say. And I've been fascinated as to why that is. I mean, I think that the quality of the product might have had something to do with that, and the innovation might have had something to do with that. But the way that he delivered his presentations was always something that really struck me as being quite special. And so I was reading a book quite recently. It's called Talk Like TED, and we'll speak a little bit more about that particular book a bit later on. But I came across this quote that I just thought was really interesting. And so it's by Carmine Gallo, and he says, Steve Jobs wasn't a natural speaker. He worked at it really, really hard. And his confidence levels improved because he cared intensely about the message, the aesthetic, and the look of his brand. And that struck me as being really useful, because when I think about when I deliver a presentation, or when I think about presentations that I've sat in that have been really impactful or have had a sort of a profound impact on me, it's probably been because the message has been so clear, there's been attention put to the aesthetic and the look of the brand. And I think we're going to do a little bit of exploring of that today. And I want to push it a little bit further and think about how we can make that message stick. But I thought that that was a really appropriate sort of quote to direct our focus today, and that's what I want to do. I want us to think about what our message is as we begin to think about putting together our LILAC talks, and I want to think about how we can make that message sort of really stand out, and then how we can really make that message not only effective for our audience, but to sort of inspire them to think about how they can take your message and apply it in their own scenario. So that's sort of the big broad theme of what I'm hoping that we can get out of today, this morning or this afternoon. Let's get into it and let's see where we go. Okay, so thinking about that message, I think it's a really useful sort of practice to think about the plan ahead. And we're about 8 weeks away from LILAC right now, and it's probably about time to start to think about the plan that we're going to set forward in terms of the message that we're going to be delivering, the paper that we're going to be delivering. And I think the more time that we can put into this planning ahead, the more effective our presentation is going to be. And so when I say plan ahead, I think what I'm really meaning is finding what that key message is that we're trying to get across to our audience. What is that sort of key takeaway that we want our audience to leave our session with? And that's going to take a little bit of time to think about what our key message is. But think about this in terms of So my mom has no idea what I do for a living. I mean, she knows that I'm a librarian, and she's figured out that I no longer live in Ireland, but she's like, I don't really know what he does for a living. And so whenever I'm telling her that I'm going to present, wherever I'm going to present, she's always trying to figure out what it is that I'm going to talk about. And so I've discovered pretty quickly that in order for my poor mom to be able to understand what it is that I do for a living, I need to work on my key message. I need to figure out what is that sort of short soundbite that I'm going to give not only to my mom, but to other audience delegates that is really going to sell what it is that I'm talking about. And so I'm encouraging you to think about your overall talk that you've just been accepted, that you're about to get ready. What is sort of that key message? What is the takeaway that you want your delegates to leave with? And so I'm going to use an example. A couple of years ago, my awesome colleague Sean and I delivered a LILAC paper on some assessments that we did of student work. So we used a rubric and did some assessment, and it was a pretty fun project for us to do. And we spoke about it at LILAC a couple of years ago. And so when I think about the key message that might have come from that talk, it might have been something like, we did assessment in my library and here's what we discovered. And that is pretty much effectively what we did talk about that day. But I'm not so sure that that's the key message. I'm not so sure that that's what we want our audience to leave with. I'm not sure that that's what's going to get me excited. And therefore, if it's not going to get me excited, I'm wondering, is it going to get my audience excited? It's not going to make me jump up in the morning and think, yeah, that's what I want to do my presentation on, and it's going to inspire a lot of folks. And in a lot of ways, it's just a case of reframing that and finding what it is that is our key message. And so in this case, it wasn't that we did assessment in my library and here's what we discovered, but that it was more assessment of student work made us better teachers. And that, I think, was our key takeaway for that particular paper, which I hope is a lot more sort of inspiring, a lot more exciting, and a lot more engaging, not only for us as presenters, but for our audience as well. And I encourage everybody to think, when they're thinking about their headlines or their key message, to think in terms of headlines, to think like a tweet, that sort of short soundbite that is going to go out there and capture the imagination of your audience. So I want to, again, just use the chat box. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this. I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about your key message. So most of us are about to put together a paper for LILAC. What is the key message from that talk? What do you want your audience to leave with? One overall big message. So if you meet someone in the corridor of UCD and they're about to go into your session, and maybe they're torn between your session and another session, what is that one overall big message that you want your audience to leave with? Think about that for just a few seconds. And then I'm encouraging you to share it in the chat box. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about that, and then we will come back as a group. Yeah, and I'm going to encourage you to send it, to make sure that when you're sending your message, to make sure that that drop down is sending to everyone so that we can all see your key message. Jenny, feel the passion. Wow, that is exciting. I'm wondering what that might mean. Super. Okay, is your information literacy teaching fit for purpose? How do you know? Nice. What is your key message? So think in terms of newspaper headlines. Think in terms of a tweet, 140 characters or in or around that. Rupert, web conferencing, you can do it too. Nice, I love that. You can do it too, because that's, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, about how you're going to inspire your audience to not just understand what you're doing, but to think about how they can apply it into their practice too. It's really great, thank you. Peter, we changed our strategy 3 years ago, and here's what worked. David, I love this one. Employers' needs can shape more engaging IL sessions. Yeah, so that's a great example, because this is something that perhaps we're not all focused on, and yet that sort of one headline, that one sort of key message is really capturing our imagination and hopefully going to make us think about what that means for our own practice. Stuart, developing your information literacy for researchers by using different delivery methods. Yeah, nice. There's going to be a ton of sessions at LILAC about different instructional methods. Yeah, so it's nice that you've made that sort of specific to IL for researchers. Sarah Ann, do online marketing tools work when trying to engage first-year undergraduates in information literacy? Nice, and I love the way that that's formed as a question, because that would suggest to me that that's going to be a more sort of meatier research project, I'm guessing. Lindsay, changing the approach to information literacy sessions at an institutional level contains lots of hidden quicksand. Beware of the quicksand. That's amazing. Any more of those sort of key messages that we're trying to get across? Charlotte, student workers and peer-led outreach can engage students and add benefits to information literacy sessions. This is, I am going to just say it right here and now. I think LILAC 2016 is going to be one of the best yet. Some awesome, awesome papers on the schedule. Using EPQ for outreach and inspiration. Lucy, EPQ, for those of us who are not informed, can you tell us what that is? Could perhaps guess. Could be a quiz. What does EPQ stand for? Extended Project Qualification. Wow. Nice. Every possible question. Nice. Excellent. Great. Well, thank you for sharing those key moments, those key messages. That, I think, is going to be pretty crucial as you go and develop your talk. I am always trying to refer back to what it is that my key message is, because we'll talk in a little bit about how you're never going to have enough time to talk about all of the things. And so I'm often using my key message to go back and think, should this piece of information that I want to put into my presentation, should it stay in there? Does it follow the key message? And if not, well then we've got a really interesting question to ask about whether it should stay there. Nice. One final one, an extra project that some A-level students take. Oh, presumably that's referring to the extended possible question. Nice. Carrie's got one final one. The potential for librarians to facilitate of bottlenecks to learning is greatly enhanced when we consider student learning holistically, addressing both the cognitive and the affective domains. Nice. That was a bit of a tongue twister for me this morning, but I'm with you. I'm with you. Awesome. Okay, so what do we do with our key message then? How do we sort of develop that out? Well, I want to refer back to that Talk Like TED book that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. So Talk Like TED is a book written by Carmine Gallo, who's done a lot of research and sort of speeches about effective speeches, effective presentations, and he's done a lot of work on the influence of TED and the TED Talk phenomenon, which is, I think, really appropriate because in the last few years, the TED Talks have really influenced the way that we consume information and the way that we expect delivery of information to hit us. And in Talk Like TED, he talks about the rule of 3 key points, and it is effectively as this, that there's science behind this, that the importance of consciousness is interesting, but it doesn't mean much unless you can apply it to improve the impact of your pitch or presentation. Understanding the rule of 3 will help. The rule of 3 simply means that people can remember 3 pieces of information really well. Add more items and retention falls off considerably. So effectively, what Carmine Gallo is telling us is, when you have your key message, after that, you want to develop 3 key points from that, and no more and no less, for that effective sort of consumption of information, if you like. And so when I think about the example that I just shared, assessment of student work makes us better teachers. When I think about the 3 key points that we might have had from that for our LILAC talk a couple of years ago, it was, okay, point number 1, that we built a rubric and we got some student coursework. And then from that, we discovered a whole load of things about our students. And then that led to us making some changes. And by and large, there are 3 big main points. And the thing about this is to be conscious of the weighting of these 3 points. So we could have built a whole presentation for about an hour about building a rubric and getting access to that student coursework, particularly within our own context or within our own sort of scenarios. But that is not what is going to engage our audience. What's going to engage our audience is actually the stuff that we discovered around number 2 and number 3. And so we want to make sure that we're touching upon some of those things in almost a building block type of way. But it's our 3 key main points, and we want to think about where we really want to put our emphasis and our efforts so that we get our bigger, broader key message out there. Does that make sense for you guys? The 3 big main points. And then from that, you can start to build sort of a narrative around each of those points to build up your overall bigger talk. But in this case, assessment of student work made us better teachers led us to 3 main points that we put in some systems in place to get access to student work. We discovered a whole host of things about that student work, and then the change that we made as a result of what we found out. And that was pretty much the skeleton of our talk, the 3 main points. So, thinking about your key message that you just typed into the chat box, take a little bit of time to think about some of those 3 key points. What are they? What might they look like? And I encourage you to share some of those in your chat box. So what are those 3 key points that you want your audience to take away with? And I'm imagining that the combination of those 3 is going to lead back up into your big key message. So think about that for a couple of seconds. What are your 3 key points? Julia, thanks for sharing. So you're referring back to your key message about the web conferencing, and you can do it too. So your 3 points, what we did and why, how it went, and what we want to do next. Nice. So yeah, it's a pretty standard formula, right? So what we did and why, and then again, you might want to spend a lot of time on how it went, so how you discovered or what you learned along the way. And then number 3 is going to be really important for you as well, is what you want to do next and where you want to grow this particular initiative. Nice. Thank you for sharing. So Ginny, be really interested in student learning, be engaging and entertaining, and then reflect afterwards. And I'm just going to scroll back up to see if I can recall your key message. Let's see. I'm not finding it really quickly. You might just drop it into the box again just so that you remind us of what your key message was. Charlotte, peer-led sessions, what was involved? What did we do? What did we discover? And benefits to staff and the way we work, and benefits to both students and peer leaders. Yeah, nice. And again, I think number 2 and number 3 are going to be those really meaty and really interesting tidbits for a lot of audience members. And when I say that, it's not that your first part isn't important, because again, we want to figure out how it is that you got to the point that you got to in your project or in your paper. But number 2 and number 3 allows us to really think about how it might impact our own practice. Jenny was referring to feel the passion. Thank you. Carrie, thank you. So number one, we did a study and we learned the role of emotions in the research process are not to be ignored. Nice, that is amazing. Data from our study show that the emotions that are most influential in students' research experience are confidence, worry, frustration, and anxiety, and acknowledging the affective domain has major implications for our teaching and for our professional practice. Yeah, you've definitely had me excited to go and to watch your talk. That's nice, excellent. Thank you so much. Any others? David, so employers' needs can shape more engaging information literacy sessions. So what employers want? Yeah, so that's going to be a key part of figuring out your session, right? And how this impacts and affects information literacy sessions and how this benefits student attendees. Nice, so the impact on actual students. Great. Okay. Need to get overview of information literacy teaching to aid planning and promotion. How and who do we consult, and what does this mean? What do we do with this information, and how does it inform our practice and its benefits to stakeholders? Nice, and again, I think a lot of your audience are really going to be interested in that final part. Nice. Lindsay, changing information literacy sessions to institutionally adopt the ACRL framework. I know there's going to be a ton of folks who are going to be really interested in your session. Engaging librarians in process is challenging. Engaging faculty is vital, and the ACRL framework is good for inspiration, but not for action. Yeah, there are some really useful and important insights. And I can imagine that if you build your story or your message around those, that it's going to be really impactful. So Emma U of B just sent one to the CILIP WebEx account. So one, win bid to support massive leadership course. Number two, we're a small team, students based everywhere. What do we do? And then number three, how we addressed it using teleconferencing. Nice. And then Stuart, using different approaches to information literacy for researchers. His 3 key points are, number one, changing priorities in the higher education landscape. How we're approaching information literacy for researchers using different initiatives, and then 3, close examination of an online module we deliver. Nice, yeah, clear delineation between your 3 points there. And then Lucy, the EPQ, which we now know all about, is taking off in a really big way. Nice, we've established a good way of supporting it at the U of B, which is also a way of engaging in the community and potentially inspiring students to continue studies at university. And 3, here's our framework, which you can use. Nice. Again, I really love that. What usually follows in sort of the third part, which is, here's our thing, think about how you can apply that in your own practice. Very nice. Awesome. Sarah Ann, why and how we're using online marketing tools. Is it supporting transition? How are students engaging? I think that's going to be a really interesting point to pull apart and to investigate. And how does it fit in with an existing IL program? Nice. Thank you for sharing all of those. That's really great. I love the way that you guys are thinking about breaking down your topics and thinking about your key points. So when you have your key message and then your 3 key points, it's then a case of fleshing out your 3 key points into a narrative, into stories, using lots of different sort of imagery and perhaps some statistics and some research to really tell the story of not only your 3 key points, but always coming back to what is that key message that you want your audience to take away with. And the way that I do this is by using a ton of Post-its and a ton of sticky notes. And what I usually do is I start to flesh out those 3 key points on sticky notes, and then start to sort of build sticky notes around those key points so that I'm slowly but surely building up a narrative of my overall bigger story. The reason why I love the Post-it approach is because I limit one idea to one Post-it note. I never go beyond one idea per Post-it note. And then I can start to lay them out and start to think about the flow of my talk and start to think about what makes sense in terms of the narrative and start to think about moving things around. And I spend a decent amount of time at this stage because I want to make sure that the work that I'm doing here directly feeds into probably my slide deck. And I've often expanded on a particular point by adding additional Post-it notes or additional points at this stage. And when I build up what I think is a fairly close map of my talk, I then start to move into building up my slide deck. And so this is from the Postit map is from a talk that I did at LILAC a couple of years ago, and started to use the Postit map, and then that led relatively quickly through to actually building up my slides. So we went from Postit notes to actually building up our slide deck, and it was really a useful way of actually starting to map out the talk that I was actually starting to do. So I encourage you to think around that Post-it note approach. Start to build up your 3 key points and start to think about what do you need, what stories, what narratives, what statistics, what images do you need to actually build up that big story, but always keeping in mind what it is, what key message you're trying to get across. That makes sense for folks? I hope that gives you a little insight as to my thinking. And then one other thing in terms of building your message is to actually bring to life the abstract. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean theoretical concepts, although if that's what you are talking about, then that's absolutely appropriate. When I refer to abstract, I mean the abstract that we had to write for the proposal back in October or November. Here is one of the big things that I have learned over the number of years that I've been attending conferences, both as an attendee and as a presenter. If you've built an abstract and you decide to deviate from that abstract in your talk, people are probably going to get a bit mad. So you want to make sure that you refer back to your abstract. It is your roadmap for what you want to talk about. So go back and revisit that abstract that you wrote for the LILAC committee right before the holidays and think about whether you are covering all those points, because think about it, your audience are coming to your talk based on the abstract that's available in the program, and so you want to make sure that you are definitely addressing all of those things in that abstract that you wrote. And we've all been there. We've all been there where we've written an abstract where perhaps the project has been ongoing and things have changed a little bit since you wrote that abstract. And that's totally normal, but you do want to make sure that you start to address some of those bigger things that you've got in your abstract. So I encourage you, if it's been a while since you read your abstract, to make sure that you dig it back out again and refer to it constantly as you start to build up your presentation. All right, okay, so I want to take a moment to just pause and see if we have any questions about thinking about your message and starting to build it up. Anything that you're curious about or not sure about? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, but again, do keep them coming if you do have any questions. Okay, so let's talk about the devil and the detail, or how to make your message pop. And so I want to spend a few minutes talking about sort of the aesthetics of presentation. So as you can tell, I'm not really into bullet points. And so one of the things that I would like to say is we should bring depth to the PowerPoint. I don't mean literally the PowerPoint, but I probably mean more the bullet point. So think about this in context. You are going to be in the middle of a really busy LILAC program where a lot of PowerPoint is on the go and a lot of bullet points are on the go. And they're probably not quite as effective as they could be. And so I would really encourage you to think beyond the bullet point and start to think about those points that you were making in your Post-it notes a few minutes ago, or those 3 main messages that you're trying to break out. Do you really need a bullet point for them? I encourage you to break away from the bullet point, and hopefully, if you're following along the slides here where there is not one single bullet point, hopefully that you can think about how bullet points aren't necessarily as effective as they could be. So I'm encouraging you to think beyond the bullet point. Okay, let's pause for just a second because I'm just seeing a message from Carrie. So for an international audience, how much info do you think we should provide about our association-specific guidelines such as the framework? Yeah, great question, Carrie, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of the tomato-tomato effect and how that LILAC is really very much an international conference. But I'm happy to address your question right now. So here's the thing, guys. LILAC is an international conference, and we've got delegates coming from, obviously, the UK and Ireland, but I know that we've got some delegates from Canada, we've got some delegates from the US, and we've often had delegates from Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, all of these amazing places. And so I'm going to talk in a little bit about how context is going to be key, right? And so you want to make sure that you've given enough information to your audience so that they are totally at sort of the same wavelength that you are in terms of the framework that you're talking about or the environment that you're situated in. But I would encourage you not to necessarily fall into the trap of talking about every single minutia or every single detail. Certainly with the ACRL framework, I think a lot of UK and Irish and European librarians would be at least familiar with it. Whether or not they're using it or adapting it is probably a bit of a stretch, I would imagine. But I encourage you in the chat box, if you are one of our sort of European librarians who are very familiar with the ACRL framework, to jump in and make those comments. But yeah, great question. I'm going to come back to that in just a few minutes, Carrie. So yeah, depth to the PowerPoint is one of my key messages, but also depth to the Prezi, right? We've all been in scenarios where someone's using a Prezi and they're flying all over the screen and it looks really impressive, and then someone will invariably turn around and say, I just got a bit seasick. So I encourage you when you're putting together your slides to just be mindful of that, right? So I'm not saying don't use PowerPoint, or I'm not saying don't use Prezi, because really what are the other tools that are out there? But just to be thoughtful around all the whiz sort of technology and tools that they do. Do you really need all of those things? And I have a bit of a sort of a philosophy in mind that our slides are supposed to be there to support what we're talking about, but they're not the thing that people go to watch, right? So I don't go into a session and say, I'm going to go to Carrie's session because Carrie's got some amazing slides. I mean, Carrie does have amazing slides, but I'm really there to hear Carrie, to hear her story, and to think about how I can introduce that sort of concepts into my own practice. And so I encourage you to actually not to rely on your slides so much as a crutch, and that involves sort of not sort of reading them word for word, but to think about them as your backing singers, to think about them as the thing that's going to reinforce your point, as opposed to be the thing that you lead with. Okay, what else have we got? So as you could probably tell, I happen to fall into the school of thinking that images are really impactful when it comes to presentations. And so I encourage you to make use of images right throughout. And that forces you to do a couple of different things. It forces you to move away from long, lengthy text on a slide, which is actually going to distract your audience. If you've got massive blocks of text on your slides, your audience are going to be reading your slides and are not necessarily going to be listening to you. You are the star of the show, right? It is you and your project that has brought the audience in to see. And so use your slides and use your images as a way to enforce and to back up your story as opposed to the thing that they are actually there for. I hope that makes sense. I encourage you to think about the fonts that you're going to use. And so I always actually play around with different fonts, and I usually break away from the default fonts or the packaged fonts that are available in either PowerPoint or whatever program that I'm happening to use. And I actually head to a site like Font Squirrel and start to think about the fonts that I'm going to use to build up my story. And I try and select some fonts that are going to be consistent in telling the story that I want to tell. And so I typically would go and pull out a serif font and a sans serif font and start to play around with what they look like. Again, thinking back to that quote about how Steve Jobs thinks about his message and the aesthetics of his message, I think the fonts are sort of an extra way of thinking about how impactful your message can be. Similarly with colors, especially if you are beginning to use images in a really impactful and illustrative way, white text or darker color text is often not going to necessarily show so well on particular images, so you might want to think about pulling out various key colors from some of these images to, again, highlight some of the key messages that you're trying to get across. And the word that I want to give you right now is that you don't want to necessarily go overboard with these fonts and these colors. It is a way to subtly highlight some of those key messages, some of those key points that you're trying to pull out. And so in this particular case, I pulled out the green from the topmost pencil because it was a great way of highlighting the main word on the darker text. And I make use of Adobe Color all the time, which is a web-based application. You just want to pull out the red, green, blue values of your colors using a color swatcher. Most of the PCs and Macs have a color swatcher sort of app on our machines that will give us the red, green, blue values of our colors, and then the Adobe Color program is really great for pulling out some of those compound colors, thinking about colors that complement or contrast with the colors that are in an image. And I think it's a really effective way to make some of your fonts and your themes and your words really stand out. I encourage you to check out the chat box as I'm talking away, because there's some amazing commentary going on. So Ginny, thank you. Yeah, so use the eyedropper tool in PowerPoint. That will help you pull out the red, green, blue values of your colors. And then for accessibility, a sans serif tends to be recommended. There's also a font that is particularly good for dyslexic participants. That is really excellent advice. Thank you so much for adding that, because we never know who our audience are, and we want to make sure that that we're being as accommodating to the needs of our audience as best we can. For accessibility, avoid black text on white background. Thank you so much, Kay. I'm trying to think whether I follow that rule right throughout. Thank you. So while we're talking about sort of the aesthetics, I want to say a little bit about space as well. So I try and use space in a really impactful and meaningful way. And I think the best way to illustrate this is using an example. And let's go back to our rubric example that I was talking about. So if I'm talking about assessment of student work and telling our audience that we've built a rubric, one of the first things that our audience will always say is, do you have that rubric, or can we see the rubric? Can we see that grading sheet? And so we've experimented with that a little bit, and we started out with this horrendous thing, which is not very legible at all. And so if you're in a talk and finding yourself saying, you're not going to be able to see this, but if I point over here to this thing, you might be able to see in tiny writing this very particular thing. If you're finding yourself saying that, then really what's the point of having that in your slide at all? And so in this particular case, when we're trying to get a particular thing across to our audience, there's a different way of doing it, and so here's how we do it. We actually turn the rubric into just an image. Here's an image. We have a rubric. If you want to see it, go to this URL. And our audience members always have devices with them, and so it's really easy for our audience members to pull that rubric up or whatever it might be. So if you're finding yourself trying to project or give your audience members a lot of text, try and think about whether it's the most appropriate way to give them that item. Perhaps a short URL will do the very same trick. Great. So a couple of questions coming in that I'm happy to pause for. Where do you get images from? I struggle to get good ones without copyright. And then Ginny has also already written back to say, I'm liking Pixabay at the moment. Yeah, I actually try and find stock images that do not require attribution. And there are a number of sites that have those. Graphosography is one that I find myself gravitating towards a lot. I have put some links towards the end of the presentation that will give you access to the sort of the big sites that I go to. Yeah, so great question. And then you can search flickr.com Creative Commons for images with a Creative Commons license. Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of Creative Commons images out there. Nice. And then finally, in sort of the aesthetics of your presentation, something really important to think about when you are building up your beautiful presentation that's got lots of images and lots of customized fonts and colors, you want to think about what that's going to look like when you transfer it over to a different machine. And so you need to put in a little bit of thought about how mobile your presentation is going to be. And so if you just lift that PowerPoint and send it to another machine, particularly if you've got customized fonts, they're not going to be installed with your presentation, and so your beautiful fonts that you spent hours picking out are going to be gone. And so I encourage you to actually save your PowerPoint as a PDF, because that's going to embed all your colors and your fonts, and then you just open up a PDF on the machine that you're presenting at, go up to View and click Presenter View, and then you are good to go exactly like it as if it was a PowerPoint. And so PDF is king. Unless you're delivering a webinar and you send the PDF and the slides go sideways, which if you were joining us a little bit earlier, you would have discovered, which is what happened to my slides today. But generally, PDF has never really given me too much trouble. All right, okay, conscious of the time, so let's keep going. And I want to talk a little bit about engaging your audience or making sure that that message sticks. And so, as we were just talking about before, providing context is going to be really important. You want to make sure that your audience has enough context that they can get beyond the really simple questions, such as, how do you get access to whatever it is that you're talking about? So depending on the scenario, context is going to be really important. So I start pretty much every single talk that I do about information literacy right up at the top saying, all of our students in Chaplain College get information literacy instruction 7 times throughout their undergraduate degree through this innovative program called the CORE program. It's a general ed program. And that's enough context so that I can then talk about the main thing that I want to talk about. So think about in your message, what are those key things that your audience is going to need in order for them to be able to think about the actual thing that you want to talk about. You don't want your audience members to be stuck in the sort of the scenario of not understanding the environment that you're within. And I think that's going to be really key for sort of those international delegates. Provide enough context so that your audience are not necessarily lost from the outset. But that's tricky because you want to do that without getting in the weeds, without bogging yourself down with so much information that you can never get beyond into the key message that you're thinking about. So I encourage you to spend a decent amount of time thinking about how you're going to set that context and do it in a way that you're not confusing your readers. All right. Yeah, so Catherine just sent a message there. We are going over our advertised time slot. I apologize for that because in a minute you're going to see how I'm going to give you advice about time. But yeah, I encourage you to stay and hopefully we won't overrun too long. Okay. So yeah, one of the big things about LILAC is that it is so practitioner-based, and this is one of the clear benefits of delivering a presentation at LILAC. And what you're doing is you're inviting your audience to put your face here, if you like. Imagine what it would look like in your scenario if you were able to take my key message and apply it to your context. And that's exactly what you want your audience to walk away with. So think about how you are going to invite your audience to move beyond the specifics of your context and start to think about how they could adopt your project, how they could adopt your approach into their particular scenarios. And I've often done that in the middle of a presentation. I've often said, hey, we have access to all of our students multiple times throughout their undergraduate degree for information literacy instruction. You might not have that, but what would it look like in your scenario to do rubric-based assessment, for example? So invite your audience to really reflect and to really think about that. And then really, do you need to tell them absolutely everything? Do you need to tell them all of the things? Because again, the more bogged down that you get in the minutiae, the less impactful your messages are going to be. And so if you're finding yourself building up these really elaborate talks, go back to your 3 key points, go back to your main message, and think about what can be pared back. And I love what Ginny just put in. Details can go in a PDF, absolutely right. And then some of those details can be saved for the questions and answers as well. So think about paring your message back, because time is going to be particularly crucial for you, right? So tomato, tomato, yes, this is an international conference. Let me give you some sort of context around that. So for our UK and Irish delegates, particularly for US audiences, they don't necessarily talk so much about revision or study skills, and we don't really talk about how information literacy impacts employability here in the US. That's not to say that you shouldn't talk about those things, but again, frame that around some context so that your audience can actually get up to speed with you. And then for our US and our international delegates, in the UK and Ireland, there's not really such a thing as Gen Ed, and we don't really have majors or minors. So again, not that you're not supposed to talk about those things if that's important for your research and for your projects, but just think about setting that context and be open to that international audience that you're going to get. It is one of the most amazing things about LILAC is that we have that true international perspective coming through, and I think that's more true in the last couple of years. And so just to bear that in mind when you're putting together your talk, and reach out to any LILAC delegate, either past, present or future, who are always willing to sort of just check you on any sort of questions that you might have about the internationalness, if you like, of some of that terminology that you're doing. Yeah, Jenny, anyone thought of producing a transatlantic glossary? Absolutely. I think there are days where that could absolutely be necessary. A couple of other quick points as well. I love a good chart as much as the next person. These are some charts that we pulled out from our rubric-based assessment. But again, think about the impact. Is this going to be impactful, or actually something like this? So this is pretty much the same data, just interpreted in a different way and presented in a different way. So our students tend to have less trouble finding sources, but using and connecting sources proves more difficult. It's pretty much the same data that's in that previous slide. So again, just think about the way that you're presenting your message, and just try and think about how impactful it is. Again, I'm not saying don't use charts or don't use data. They're pretty important, but just think about switching it up and making it the most impactful that it can be. Time is crucial in a LILAC presentation. So your amazing facilitators who will be there with you will have time cards for you. Don't think that you can break those time cards. You cannot, because LILAC's schedule is pretty tightly packed. And to be fair to everyone, those facilitators do an amazing job of making sure that everything runs smoothly. And so if you think that you're going to try and sneak in that extra minute, again, go back to your key message and think about paring it back. Time is pretty crucial. And I think for your attendees and your audience, they appreciate it if you build in that time for questions and answers at the end. It gives you that time to have that conversation. So I encourage you to make sure that you're sticking with that time constraint. So are you doing a short paper or a long paper? The time is obviously different for both. If you are doing that short paper, you really do want to be sticking to your 20 minutes with 10 minutes for questions and answers. And then if you're taking a long paper, you've got a little bit more room to breathe or to go in depth. You've got 35 minutes with 10 minutes for questions and answers. Again, I really encourage you to keep that question and answer time sacred, because it really gets the conversation going in a really different way. It allows your audience to engage with your content in ways that your slides can't. So yeah, make sure that you build in that time for questions, which is what I was hoping to do. And so that brings us towards the end of our slides. I recognize that we're a few minutes over our scheduled time. Thank you so much if you have to head away, but I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Charlotte, thanks. You had to head away. I'm glad that it was useful for you. Do feel free to follow up if you have any other questions. Yeah, so send those questions through in the chat box. While we're waiting for some of those to come through, here are some of those resources that I was talking about. Lindsay, great question. Do you have any advice for a presentation that is heavy on narrative with very little to no data? They are kind of my favorite because you really get to think about the images that you're going to use and the stories that you're going to tell. If this is the way that you're going to be telling your presentation, you have the potential to have a really impactful conference presentation. So I encourage you to think around that imagery, to think about what are those 3 main narratives that you want to tell for that bigger overall picture, and then just think about, be really conscious about the way that you're going to deliver that so that you're not bogging your audience down in the minutiae, but that you're leaving them inspired. But yeah, little to no data, I actually think you've got a really great opportunity to be really impactful. Rachel, are there any license restrictions on using music? I would imagine that if you're using sort of really popular music or well-known music or music that have copyright restrictions, then there probably would in terms of licensing. So I'm not familiar of any sort of open source music, or at least I don't have any URLs to hand, but I bet there are a ton out there. But I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I think you might have a slightly different question that I misinterpreted. So do let me know if I can help clarify that. David, I really struggle with visuals. I can't see things in my head, which makes it tricky. I would guess that a person to act as a visual sounding board would be helpful. Absolutely. I am always trying to get that sort of feedback, because when I pull out an image and if someone close by says, why did you choose that globe or whatever it might be, that really tells me that the image didn't have that impact that I wanted it to have. So yeah, get that sounding board so that you can get that, that extra sort of input. Yeah, so it depends on the music. There is copyright-free music available in Creative Commons Mixer, I think. Yeah, absolutely. There would be copyright-free music out there, but I have this sort of inkling that you have a specific sort of song or piece of music in mind, and if that's the case, then yeah, be thoughtful around that. Sarah Ann, Canva.com is a really great free tool for designing infographics, useful to illustrate data. Absolutely, yeah, I've been experimenting with Canva a little bit. It's a great resource. Great, love that you're sharing these. Lucy, are there any specific TED Talks you can recommend on presentation speaking style? Yeah, sure. I'm going to struggle to rattle them off though, so I'm just trying to think about whether, Catherine, is that something that we might be able to share a little bit later on?
Definitely.
Great. Yeah, so why don't I put together our slides, and then I'll put together some of those links around some of the TED Talks, and we'll get that shared a little bit later on. Great, more of those links coming through. Just want to make sure that I'm not missing any questions, so I'm just going to scroll back. I'm not seeing any, but if I did, just let me know before we leave this morning or this afternoon. Okay, thank you. Good luck. And yeah, I'm going to see you in Dublin really soon. I'm looking forward to it. Great, guys. Thank you so much. I am so grateful. I hope that this was useful. Catherine, thank you for your help today. Yeah, thanks.
No problem. Thank you very much, Alan. I think we'll draw it to a close there. I think on behalf of the CILIP Information Literacy Group, I'd like to say thank you for a really great presentation, and also to our webinar host, CILIP. Thank you all for your participation. So
thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
That's the end of the recording then. So